Thanks, everyone. It was mentioned before that one of our sponsors is Lumberjack Tools. Not to be an advertisement for them, it's just who I happen to use. I reached out to them and told them I was giving this presentation, and they provide the discounts. For those who didn't pick it up, this is the sheet. I've got more up here if anyone wants them. They'll be sitting up here at the end of the presentation. For the next month, if there's anything here you like, you can get a 15% discount on everything on their website with the code. And if you just want to write it down in case you forget, it's Woodworking Guild, WWG15. That's easy to remember. All right, we got the presentation up. So while we're waiting, one of the first slides is going to come up. I will go ahead and let you know as I'm waiting that questions are encouraged. I am going to possibly limit some of the time answering. They're having Q&A during the presentation, just so I can get through what I can for you. I've got a lot to cover. I'm actually going to try to make 2 tables for you here in the short time that I have. If I don't, it's okay, you're not missing much. But I am encouraging people to stop and ask questions along the way, and I will try to keep it going at a good rate. Any luck with that presentation? Do you need the thumb drive back? All right, well, I'll keep on talking. I'm not going to wait for it, and I'll be able to just hand show you things as we're going. One thing that we may be skipping is a couple of photo samples. If we can, we'll get back to them. But more importantly is what's actually physically in front of you. So if I can lift this up as a demo, this is like a little inspiration piece here, because it's the fanciest thing I happen to bring in today. Not that it's fancy, and that's really the whole thing. The whole objective of this presentation is about not being fancy. For those that have seen some of the other presentations or seen my work, you may have seen some really complex or precision or incredibly anal present pieces that I have made. I try to get things down to 1,000th of an inch for everything that I do. But my wife and I, a number of years ago, bought a cabin up in the mountains. I wasn't going to build a workshop up there, but I wanted to be able to build things. You know, all of us have sawdust running through our veins. So as such, I had access to wood. We had to take some trees down. There was a cabin in a nearby property that had come down. It was built probably in the 20s or 30s. I scavenged some wood from it. And I asked my wife one year for my birthday to get me some tools to make log furniture. And that's how I got started making a few odd things. You are not going to see anything terribly fancy from me. And that's, like I said, the objective. I'm not planning on doing that. I see you get the presentation, which is great. I'm going to show you some photos that Grady McWhorter did, another one of our guild members. If you go to the next slide, and they are, if we can get to it. Oh, well, if he gets to it, great. If not, that's okay also. But he makes fancier rustic furniture. He makes pieces which are thoroughly more impressive than what I'm going to show you today. But I wanted to show you those if they can come up, so you get an idea of what's possible, what can be done with unique materials. He uses antlers, and he does a lot more carving and shaping than I do. But I wanted to let you know that there's more styles than just what Doug does. Okay, well, fortunately, I've got my own cheat sheet, and I'm going to show you some of the must-haves. I'm going to start with log furniture. How do you make things like that chair, like these tables? And there are some tools that you must have to make log furniture. The first thing is the saw. I just bought a hand saw. I might use it later. Almost everything I do, I use a chop saw if I had one. I didn't have it at the cabin. Pull saw, by the way, if you haven't ever used a pull saw, get a pull saw, Japanese style pull saw. They have thinner kerf. For those who are unfamiliar with it, I'm assuming everyone is by now, but you may not be. Most saws people are used to are Western style, they cut on the push stroke. The metal has to be very thick in order to handle that pressure. Pull saws cut, as you could guess, on the pull, which means that you're stretching out the metal, which means the stretching keeps it straight. It has about half the kerf, which means it's about half the pressure to cut. They're more accurate, they're faster. If you've never used one, this presentation alone, just to hear that will change your life. So get those. So you need a saw. You will need a strong drill. This is what's known as a mud mixer. It's not what you typically use for woodworking, but it's used for mixing up like compound mud and such. They're much heavier duty. They've got a lot more torque to them. They're not quite as fast, but it's what you need because the next thing that you need, you see, is this huge thing. It's a giant pencil sharpener is what's on here right now. This thing will cut the tenons, and it is big. It's got a couple big thick blades on it, cut at the angle. It goes in, and it will cut angled tenons on your wood, and you need a beast in order to do that. In fact, the one I have is variable speed, not recommended. It's just what I happen to buy. If you can find a good heavy duty saw, plug in, not variable speed, it'll give you the most power and most likely to work the best for you for years. That said, I amazingly have not burned this one out yet, and I've had it probably for about 8 to 10 years. So far, we'll see. I might burn out tonight. We'll see. This one is really kind of goes more on the amperage side of it. But this one is a 9 amp. So yeah, but 1.5 horsepower according to my more educated friend here in the front, Gary. I should know, I'm an electrical engineer. That is a rigid, yes. What happened was up in Blue Ridge, Georgia, at the Home Depot, I was able to buy a rigid drill. That was what I was able to get my hands on. So they come in different sizes. I bought a 2-inch and a 1-inch for myself, and the other companies make them. It's not just Lumberjack Tools, but I can speak to these and tell you that I've been extremely happy with them. So I'll just let you know that that works well. And they make a 1.5 inch as well. And the one other thing you need is a Forstner bit that have the same diameter as the tenons, which should be cut with the giant tenon color. So for example, if you look inside this one, I don't know where, okay, I'll kind of hold up like this. If you look inside, there's a hole in there that cuts the tenons. This one is 1 inch, 1-inch Forstner bit. You got your mortise and your tenons, you're all set. So again, just to summarize, oh, it's up, beautiful. Those are the 4 key things you absolutely need to have. But I didn't mention a 5th one, and that's a big ass hammer. So I just say this does make your life easier when you're putting everything together to tap together the wood. Before I demo, I'm going to talk about the secondary nice to have tools that make it a little bit easier. If we go to the next slide, and hopefully that, hey, beautiful. Yeah, please, what you got? Or a spade bit also could potentially work. I happen to like I just happen to like these, the Forstner bits, and also they tend to stay more precise. Now, so if you buy a 1-inch Forstner bit, there's a good chance it's a good 1-inch. Auger bits will do that for you as well. Challenge could have with an auger bit is just making sure you don't cut all the way through. Auger bits tend to purposely screw right into the wood all the way through. If you're doing through tenons, it's great. If not, you just got to be careful to make sure you stop it in time and make sure you have a reverse feature on your drill to get it back out. Spade bits I don't find as accurate for the holes. Depending on the wood you're cutting, it might wobble more and you may end up with a larger or smaller hole. So for that reason, for accuracy, I tend to like Forstners, but it's not a requirement. Yeah. Oh, the other thing is this. These are adjustable. You can move the blades in and out. So if you happen to have an auger or spade and it's not a perfect 1-inch, for example, you can adjust these accordingly. So it's, I get these at lumberjacktools.com. Yep, and that name is actually on the coupons that were handed out. Yeah, and if you didn't get one, there you go. There you go. So the nice to haves. These are things that allow you to do a little bit more or make things a little bit easier. Number one is a draw knife. This was given to me by an extremely good friend a number of years ago who happens to be sitting back there. His name is Bill. He came in late and didn't get a chance to introduce himself, so I will. Everyone say hi to Bill. Bill didn't know I was going to be demoing his tool. This was a rusty piece of crap when Bill gave it to me. He got it. And I didn't care, and I loved it, and I sharpened it up. I got the rust off of it, and it's a nice little mirror-ish finish, and it works beautifully. This will allow you to take the bark off of logs. This will allow you to do a little bit of shaping if you need to, and maybe make things a log that's a little out of rounder, so this works better. So draw knives are outstanding. They're also good exercise if you got a lot to clean out. The second thing is called log lock. I didn't get one of these until very recently. I have my old Black and Decker Workmate bench here. I've used it to clamp my logs into place. It works fairly well, but sometimes they spin out. The log lock is a nice accessory that allows you to literally lock the logs in and they do not come loose. So having that really good way of clamping, it's not a requirement, but it's really nice to have. It works better than trying to hand clamp things. If you don't get one of these, figure out, just some lever way of clamping things into place, your logs. The other nice to have is something called a safety sled, which I do not own. But basically, it's a guide that allows you to guide your drill. It'll guide your drill perfectly in place and slide it straight into your logs. I don't recommend one if you're just making a few pieces of furniture. It's a big accessory to get to just use a few times. However, if you like what you're doing and you think you're going to be making a lot of them, then I do highly recommend them. It allows you to really assembly line your work, do it a little bit safer, and be able to keep things perfectly aligned. And the last thing, which I literally just got in the mail last night and tested this morning for the first time, and then I'll demo for you and we'll see if I screw up or not, is a countersink. So the countersink will allow you to take those holes, your tenons, and flare them out. So that way, when you go ahead and insert a tenon in, the shoulders will get covered in as well, and it gives you a cleaner look. So I wanted to talk through the tools, but showing you, of course, means a lot more. So I'm going to do a little bit of demo, talk about what some of these things can do. And as I go through and get ready to actually make a table for you right now. Before I do, does anyone have any questions so far about any of the tools or the techniques I've shown? Yes. No. You want it to be slow and steady, basically. Whatever, these drills, these mud mixers, I don't remember the RPMs, but they don't really run that fast. So what you do want them fast enough to run smooth, but if it's a really fast machine, it could really dig into it and, uncontrolled. Oh, the variable speed is because you'll burn out the motor. Yeah, variable speed will end up happening is the motor can't always handle the power just because of the way they're designed and made. There are advantages to variable speed, but generally you want to go in hot when you make your cuts and go in fast. Anything else?
Source for your log lock.
It is the same company. Lumberjack Tools makes them, and they only make them for, I think, 2 or 3 different styles of drill, which of course they sell too. I'm not going to tell you to go and buy your drill from them, but before you buy a drill, if you think, oh, the log lock, I'm sorry, I was thinking of the sled. The log lock I also got from them, and they make 2 different sizes. This is actually the smaller one. They make them for much bigger as well. And I think that's nuts because unless you're making like a house, you don't necessarily need the bigger ones, but they do make big, hefty log locks. And it's well made. I got the heavy duty one and I've been really happy with it. Yeah.
I think they're called industrial or heavy duty cutters. Is that the black one?
Yeah, I forgot the names of all the different ones, but they have they don't call it the hobbyist, but they're like home use. They call it yeah, they also have one called commercial. I think the black ones are the commercial ones. I cannot speak to how good they all are. So I'm not going to make any recommendations one way or the other. I can just tell you that this has worked well for me, the commercial ones. You do want to keep the blades sharp. To be honest, I didn't sharpen my blade in a long time. I did resharpen it before I got ready to do this presentation, so I could show you what they could do. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about just how to make a simple table. I've got a couple examples up here, and I want to talk a little bit about the table tops first. How are we doing? Beautiful, right? The tops. So top can be, for rustic work, I like natural tops, but you can make a top out of anything. You can use these tools to cut tenons in almost anything that you can think of that's wood, and then mount it on top. So if you want to make something that has that mix of like maybe a resin top or some nice, really clean, perfectly milled top, and then have rough legs on it, which is a look that looks really sharp, you can do that. You can have metal framed tops with the wooden legs. A lot of people like that industrial look. You can do that as well. For the purpose of this demo, I'm going to talk about what I do, which is basically get hold of whatever I can while I'm up in the mountains away from everything else. And this particular table, this one, a tree came down across the road. It's a private road. I had to cut it up myself. I kept some of these oak logs in the basement to dry out. A couple of them I split, and this is one heavy table. It could be used as a table, step stool, chair. Let's talk a little bit about it. I cut it up. You notice it's not perfectly smoothed out. I use a draw knife on the back side in order to clear off the bark that's on there. And then a light sanding with a pad sander, electric pad sander, in order to kind of smooth out the cuts from the draw knife. And then just found a few places to drill some holes. Even the top, again, the idea is rustic, right? There were some holes that were in there using what I had on hand. I had a can of dark paint, I had glue, and I had sawdust. So old school, filling the holes. If I wanted to, I could have spent a little more time on it and filled them out a little bit more. As the glue dries, it does create divots. But again, for the purpose of what this was, I didn't care. I kind of liked that look and that feel, and it worked out well. So how complicated is this table? It's one log and 4 branches. And at the cabin, it actually works perfectly as an end table next to our sofa. This one we keep outside. Again, not much to it. There was an old cabin that came down. It was probably built in the 20s or 30s. And I managed to salvage some of the siding from it. And these are just a couple of the pieces from that. When I sand down wood like that, a recommendation is to not sand it down all the way, because for that look, the saw marks are really, really give it the character for the environment. That said, depending on where you are, if you're in a more, I'll say more sophisticated setting than an old cabin, you of course can clean this up, cut them nice. But I want to point out, I have no planer, no table saw. I didn't even have a chop saw at the time. So how was I going to make this with these pieces? And you'll see the something you don't normally say at a guild meeting is total crap joinery. That's an acronym I should come up with, TCJ. So total crap joinery, I will trademark that. And I didn't do anything to try to joint these pieces together. I just took a couple pieces, slapped them together. I created some pocket screws, and I had a couple other metal straps that I used to pull it together. I'm actually going to show you now how to go ahead and put together pocket screws when you don't have a Craig jig. Not everyone knows that pocket screws were around long before Craig jigs were around. And there's really not much to them. Get yourself just a good thick bit. This one is 3/8 bit. If you got a couple of pieces of wood, and again, I did nothing to join these together. You notice that's still a rough cut. If you have a table saw, go ahead, get them nice and straight, or if you have a jointer. But if you don't want to, or if you're in a location where you can't, you just want to join the pieces together. If you have a clamp, it's better, but you don't even need the clamp. I'll go ahead and clamp it myself now. But with the one piece, I'm going to drill straight in, about 1.5 inches away from the edge. drill in about a third of the way, slowly tip the drill in till I'm close to the edge, but not all the way through. And you'll notice I'm not using a brad tipped bit. Brad tipped bits make it a little bit harder to do the swivel. So actually even a less expensive bit is better for you to do this. And it's fairly simple. Start the drill, turn, drill in some more. And now, looks a lot like a pocket screw hole. By the way, with a little bit of practice, you can make them just about perfect. This one I didn't really spend a lot of time on, that hole just now. But, where to put my screws? There they are. I have another screw that I already put together earlier. Screw that in. There it is. Oh, I needed a shorter screw for this one. This is where experiments come in. I poked that one a little bit too far, but again, I did that one quick. And I just used the screws I had. But that is actually not going anywhere. And it's not even jointed wood. So it's not, this one I actually know what I did. I didn't tip it quite far enough. So that's why I went in a little bit deep. But that's all there's to it, to be able to make tops. And that's how I made this one. And I'm not going to show you, this is the Julia Child method. And now out of the oven is the finished cake. This one I went ahead and I jointed at home, got a couple of contrasting woods and glued it together. So I didn't do the no pocket holes. I didn't even bother finishing the bottom on this one. So we'll use this a little bit later to go ahead and try to see if I have time to make a table for all of you. But I thought I'd show you really how old boards can be just absolutely beautiful when you put them together like this. Yes. Not usually, it's just whatever I get my hands on. So these happen to be, this one's a little bit thin. Actually, that's about the same as that. I happened to get a nice stock of wood from this one cabin. Like I said, I came down and they were all about the same thickness, but not exactly the same. The trick, of course, is if they're not the same, if you're laying flat on the table with pocket screws on, maybe the bottoms will be stair step, but the top stays fairly flat when you work on them together. So the tops, really anything can be used as a top. Next, though, is the legs. So are we at the legs? Let's go to the legs. So legs can be anything. You can get, if you have branches that have come down and they have the bark on it, if you cut down a tree, not everyone knows this. I learned this a while ago. But if you want to leave bark on your final product, the tree has to come down in the winter after the leaves come off. What happens is the sap that usually runs between the bark and the hardwood in the middle is the lubricant. And if a tree comes down while the leaves are up, it's full of sap, there's no adhesion, and eventually that bark will pop off. If you don't want the bark, it's great to take it off at that time. There are some trees that have come down in the middle of spring after good heavy rain, and I was able to basically peel the bark off by hand. But in the winter, it's harder to take the bark off, and that's what you want. So this example is a branch that came down some time ago. I actually have in the basement a lot of branches that are all leaning up in the basement, some from winter, some from summer. And I have distinguished which ones are keeping the bark and which ones aren't. If you want to take the bark off, like this one, and you're using your draw knife, which is a really good way of doing it, it's best to do it shortly after the tree comes down. It's still wet inside. It's a lot easier to slide and cut that bark off. So one thing about it is if you go and you start to take the bark off, you've got to get rid of the cambium layer. I purposely did not fully strip this. This looked perfectly light when I took all the bark off. And 3 days later, it looked like this. It's a look you might like, in which case take advantage of it. But you have to be careful to make sure you get deep enough to get rid of that thin layer where the sap runs between the bark and the center of the tree, or it will end up being dark like this. Again, it might be what you want, but if it's not, it takes a lot more work to get rid of the rest of it. And what I'll do, and these are logs pretty much, I think, from the same tree that I used to make that chair, is after I strip off all the bark, is again, I'll just take an electric sander. If I have like electric pad sander, orbital sander will work. In this case, actually, just a regular vibrating X tends to work a little bit better, I think, and just smooth it out to get rid of the rough edges that are on there. And the next question that's going to come up is, if no one's asked yet, is green wood or dried wood. And I'm going to tell you that taking the bark, for me, this is optimal. Take the bark off if you want it off, and then whether you have bark on or off, leave it for a year if you can, at least. Depends how thick the wood is. And let it dry out. And here is why. Wood shrinks. If you try to make this and you cut out the tenon and then it shrinks, you have a very loose tenon. So it's better, not required, but better to wait for the wood to dry. And what I do with my branches is I have them very long, and the branches do tend, now here's an example of a log that I cut. You know, as they dry, they crack. So most of you have seen this if you've ever had natural wood, is the ends, they all tend to crack. It's to be expected. To minimize it, you paint or put varnish or wax on the end of your logs as they're drying. Just the same as you would do if you were to have slabs cut and drying boards. This one had wax put on the end of it and still cracked after this one was cut down about 3 years ago. But you notice on that side, no cracks. Almost never do I have cracks transverse the entire section of the log. Painting the edge makes a big difference. So if you're cutting branches, leave them long. Don't cut them in half if you can. Leave them as long as you can. And if you have to cut 4 to 6 inches off of one end, all the rest tends to be nice solid wood. Yes. I do it inside, just because the humidity level is more consistent. However, the faster they dry, the more they will crack, or more likely they will be to crack. However, I take that into account. When I leave things outside, it's so humid in Georgia, once you bring it inside and you start doing the work, it may end up cracking on you later on. That's why I like to let everything dry to inside humidity levels. And this particular chair, you notice there's no cracking on the top. The first chair I made has some pretty significant cracks because I used green wood when I made it. And I had to later on add some screws to it because it started to wobble. This chair is solid as a rock. It was done after the wood was fully dry. So I'm speaking from experience. It makes a big difference. All right. Let me go ahead and demo a couple of things here for you. First of all, I've already got the tenon cutter set up, so I'll just go ahead and do this. This thing's a beast, I can let you know. So you're going to see me here possibly fighting and screaming and it fighting back because that's the nature of the beast. But it does work well. And the way this goes in is you're supposed to put it in, put your weight up against it, turn it on, and let her rip. So sometimes it doesn't go as smooth as I'd like, and I have to do a little adjusting, but let's hope this is a nice smooth cut for you. Hold that. Oh, better than I expected. All right. So here you have a nice before and after. What it was before, there it is after the cut. A little bit off center because the wood itself is off center, which is why the shoulders not necessarily perfectly round around it. And also looks like maybe I didn't hold it perfectly straight. So it's a little bit off center. It's a little bit crooked. So again, I'm demoing. This thing slid. My basement doesn't usually slide. So you don't want sliding. That throws you off. I made this template, which is a huge help. It's with these same bits that I use, 2-inch and 1-inch. And this way I can check and see how tight the fit is. And it does have a good friction fit to it. So that's a really good fit for gluing, sliding in. It's not really moving at all. I wanted to demo for you. By the way, we can pass this around in case someone wants to take a look at it. These were 1-inch that I cut out of wet wood. It was green wood. I did that on purpose to show you what happens after it dries. I cut these about a month ago, and here it is on the 1-inch template. It didn't take long. In fact, it looks like it lost almost 1/8 of an inch. I mean, it really wobbles. It's significant. So I will talk to you a little bit about glue while we're here. And I apologize if I'm bouncing around a little bit on the talk, but it seems relevant to mention it now. If you're using green wood and you want to use green wood, it's recommended that you use polyurethane glue like Gorilla Glue. Gorilla Glue will expand. It has a little bit of flexibility to it. So if something shrinks, it tends to hold on to whatever it is that shrunk a little bit. And also Gorilla Glue requires moisture in order to work. Polyurethane glues, for those who don't know or have never used it, it's a slightly foaming glue and you're supposed to wet the surfaces. If you're using wet wood, green wood that's been freshly cut, it's already got the moisture. So it works really well. I don't tend to use it because, like I said, I now try to make all my pieces with dried wood, and I use Titebond too. I just like it. Yes?
Is your 10 cutter cutting taper or is it cylinder?
It's a cylinder. Yep, definitely a cylinder. So once you have a cut, works rather well. I cut some holes here with the Forstner bit, these 1-inch holes, and you see, that's pretty much how it looks. And you could see on these tables too, the general look. What I'll do, since I just got this, is I'm going to show you what happens then if you don't like that look with the shoulder showing, since I now have a new countersink. There is one hole I did cut earlier, and let me get a better piece of wood to show you with, instead of those shrunk ones. So this is kind of typical of how it would look. And with that shoulder cut, it locks right in. This shoulder's a little big for this particular branch, but the countersink, but you could see that the shoulder is mostly covered up. So if you prefer that look for the cleaner look, you can go for it. And I will see if I can demo cut one for you right now. I won't go quite as deep, so it'll be a little bit better for that particular sample.
One side of the countersink?
Yeah, the countersinks have a bearing. It comes with 3 bearings, 1, 1.5, and 2-inch bearings, and that guides it straight through the hole and keeps it in place. However, they're all at 60 degrees. All of these particular tensioning jigs are all set to 60 degrees, so it's a perfect fit in every one of them. For those who've never seen a workmate, these things are amazing. All right. I bought this workmate, something to talk about while I'm changing out the bits here. I bought this workmate when I graduated college, moved to a little apartment in Daytona Beach, Florida, and it had a small balcony on the back. And I'm sure my neighbors hated me because I ended up buying that, and that's when I started getting into woodwork. Oh, jeez, I wouldn't even thank me. Thank you. Bonus points for that man right there.
Your clips are still working on it. Little tips that hold the legs in.
Yeah, I'm amazed. I don't know why it all still works, but it's a nice, good metal one. I did have to replace one of the boards. It was because of this work. Before I got that log lock to hold the logs down, I was squeezing it in here and using other clamps, and that torque just tore the heck out of it. But that's what it's for, right? You're supposed to use it. All right, so this is a heck of a countersink. So for anyone who's countersinked screws, you've seen things like this. Check the depth.
That's a good idea, probably where you always need one of those.
If you're trying to get a better grip or something, you can. Oh, well, that's a nice thing though. I mean, I use it with the side and I'm grabbing it as such. So therefore, my hand's not going down. I'm keeping it up. But you're right. I mean, but I'll tell you though, a lot of people will tell you, depending on what you're using, gloves can be more dangerous than not because it'll catch. So personally, I usually try to avoid gloves when I'm using power tools, depending on the tool. I'm not going to go farther with it. You guys get the idea though, that this one, actually this side might look a little better. I could go a little deeper with it, but you get the idea. It sunk in a little bit farther. That's what it would have looked like. And that's with half the countersink. I could go farther if I want. So it's got a cleaner look to it. It just depends what you want your furniture to look like. It also gives you a slightly larger glue surface for that you're working with as well. Now, glue. When I glue the pieces together, I use a high-tech tool called an old toothbrush. Do not use a new one unless you're planning on having sticky teeth. But I just slap a bunch of glue in there, spread it around. I tend to not put the glue on the tenon. I put it in the mortise. And the reason being is to avoid seeing all that glue out when you put it in place. With the countersink, I don't have to worry about that anymore. So you can put on both the tenon and the mortise. But when I do without it, I don't want to see all that glue squeezed on and have to clean it up, especially if I'm using it with bark, live bark. It can really make a mess as far as what you're looking at. So that's what I do. And I use a lot of glue. And if a little squeezes out, so what? But you have to be really careful not to starve that glue joint and get in there nice and tight. I've not done that, but I have done through tenons. So for those who don't know what a hidden wedge tenon is, which is pretty slick, is you'll cut a notch in here in the tenon, put a small wedge in it, and when you put it in and you tap it and you drive it home, it causes the tenon to spread when you're inside. With these 1-inch tenons, it probably would work really well. I don't think it would work with this. I think this is too thick. I don't think it would spread. I just think it would really be tough to do it. The other thing is typically when you do those, you drill a little hole in order to give it some room a spring to spread in. And that will work if you countersink it. But if you're not countersinking it, I'm afraid that hole might be too far close to the edge and it might be exposed. But with the countersinks, I may actually start trying to do that. If I have any loose, like this is a little bit loose, I may do that. If I have a few loose, I might experiment with it. I've done through tenons. I've had some tables similar to this one where I cut really long tenons, drill the hole all the way through the top, and just go all the way through, and I'll use wedges on those, and they look terrific when you do that. Yes? You can get up to a certain length with it. This one will bottom out that deep. So it's going a few inches deep. So on a table like this, it's more than enough to be able to cut a tenon that's long enough to go all the way through the table. You can get a tenon on there that's about 2 inches long, and most tabletops aren't more than 2 inches. So you get a through tenon. If you have a really thick top also, and you countersink it, then once you put the countersink on it, it'll go in even farther. Really drive it home. The reason I demoed and tried the countersink on this big log is that hole, in order to go all the way in on this bottom one, that hole is actually going about 3/4 of the way through this thick log in order to really kind of sample and see what I could do with this. In case I want to see what a smaller one looks like. This is the 1 inch. You'll notice that does make a fairly rough tenon, and I actually like that because that rough tenon means more place to grab the glue, and those fab fibers expand and makes for tighter. With a good sharp blades on the tenon jig, your shoulders are going to be really smooth, and it works out well. And like I said, it's like a giant pencil sharpener. For those in the back who didn't see it, the shavings are really similar to pencil shaving. And it's incredible. This is cutting about a 1/16 of an inch at a time, the shavings. It's really cutting in deep. Not to tell you, it's a joy to use this on green wood because it just glides through it real easily and it doesn't fight. But again, the problem is you can do that, but then your tenon shrink. So it's not a good thing to have. All right. Other things you can use. This was an old split rail fence piece that I had. I actually have a piece of furniture I bought years ago that used split rail fencing for the legs, and now I know how he did it. Since then, I ended up making my own. And you can see, you could use this. I have a table at home where I use 4x4 posts. And in order to do that, you need to use the draw knife and really take it and try using your draw knife to kind of shave in the corners some, so that it's a little bit more round when you start going in. Otherwise, a little bit too big, this won't be able to start the cut. But once you're able to get the draw knife in there and get it down far enough, cut down these corners, your tenon jig will be able to get in there and it's able to start shaving right through without any problem. Works really well then. Yes?
Do you have any tips on setting the depth of those blades?
The depth of the tenon jig? Really, it's you're cutting in to whatever depth you think of the wood you're going to be using. So it takes a little practice and a little trial and error while you're cutting, because it could be a little tricky when you're going to really know how deep it is. One of the versions they make actually has a notch, so you can see how deep it's going and you can watch it. And there's a big advantage to that one. I don't have that. But otherwise, I'll make a cut. I'll go where I think it's pretty much supposed to be and back off, take a look, and just have to go a little bit farther. And that helps me. I would like to say that it'd be nice if you could mark the top and figure it out, but it doesn't really work because the thicker this is, the more it's got to go before it even starts cutting the tenon in the first place. All right. Move some of these things out of the way. Oh, another tabletop idea. Grady McWhorter lent this to me. He had this lying around his shop. Just to give you guys an idea, 3 legs and you guys got yourself a perfect, really beautiful step stool, for example, or a place to rest your legs in front of you like an ottoman. So the reason I wanted to show you this, I forgot to pull it up earlier when it's about tabletops, is let you know that it's so easy to make anything into a tabletop if you choose to. Yeah.
Like, was it just out in the woods, it's dry? I mean, or there?
Typically, it's out in the woods, like I talked about earlier about wood drying indoors versus outdoors, is that I find that wood that's outside, especially sitting in the ground, is not going to be dry. If it's touching the ground, it's going to have moisture in it and possibly some rot. One thing you sometimes find is wood that came down is like leaning against another tree, and that will be drier. You won't know until you cut into it, though, whether the inside has gone spongy or not. Because sometimes it's not nice and hard like this. Sometimes the inside just starts getting really brittle just from being out there and the way decay starts kicking in. But I would say no reason not to get it, cut into it, and try it. For me personally, if I were to have a piece of wood from the outside like that, I would probably bring it inside and wait at least a few months before I actually did anything with it anyway. Anyone want, and people have seen draw knives before. Does anyone want to see a demo of taking any bark off? If so, I'll show you. If not, I'll jump on to the next step. Wood? Okay. So just real quick, Might as well use this one. The log lock works well for this also. However, I already took it off, and I'll just go the old school with the workmate here. Say it again. Oh, that's right. Didn't bring one of those with me, but those would work great. So you can find these all over the place at antique shops and such, like my friend did. And you never know what you're going to find, but typically they're really easy to go back and resharpen. You just need a really good stone and just kind of work and flatten it. Once you do, you tend to hold it with the blade tipping down, and you can slide and go up depending on what you're trying to do. Hopefully this won't slide on me, so I'm going to put my foot on it here. That would be great. All right, there's a knot here. I'm just going to try to knock it off. All right. Sorry, behind me. You're going to get hit. Really dry wood. That's why I like shaving them while they're still nice and wet. But all right, I'm not going to spend too much time cleaning it up, but
Get the idea.
you get the idea. I just got that knocked off. It didn't take a whole lot. And if I was a little bit smoother, a little more finesse to it, a little bit lighter with it, I would have prevented some of that knockup. But just because I was rushing, which I should never do, it's a little bit cruder. But it's pretty clean. It's actually where the cuts are, it's nice and smooth. And if you're just a little bit easier with it and don't rush through it, you can get a lot done with it. There you go. You guys can pass it around. All right. Now I'm going to show you the, like I said, the cooler child out of the oven table here. So making a table is pretty simple. I thought this was too simple to show you, just sticking 4 legs together. That you guys deserve more than that. So I have the top. Here's the bottom of it. Not that this is complicated, but it's more typical for a larger table with more stability, is to have a spreader built into it. I have found, by the way, these really aren't moving. It's not in there very deep. I made this about 4 years ago, and it's still really solid, even with those 4 legs. I will say that if you feel like the top is a little bit too thin, you want longer tenons, what I've done to make other ones is to secure the different boards together. I'll just get other boards and put them on the bottom, 90 degrees, screw them in. Now I've got a thicker surface for which I can go ahead and make my mortises. The one thing to keep in mind is that when you do it, make sure you don't use screws where you're going to be drilling your holes. Guess how I know? So not too bad time-wise. I'll do this fairly quick, just show you the quick assembly. I'm not going to put the whole thing together right now because I want to spend a little bit of time showing you another table design other than log. Something totally different, but still rustic. But I ended up cutting 4 legs, same size, and then cut out the tenons. I cut the log just pretty much the same size to start with and try to get the tenons cut so they're not thicker, obviously, than the board is itself. If it turned out that I cut a tenon too deep, then I would have been able to cut the taken it off, and with the saw, cut one of the tenons a little bit shorter, knowing that later I'd have to cut the bottoms off of all the rest, or I can cut all the tenons the same, try to keep the length the same. But the fact is, with warped and twisted boards and what you're doing here, that table will wobble. And I will show you what you can do to get rid of that wobble later. What I like to do is lay out all my pieces, think about what I want, and you will see that I have marked all of my pieces. My 4 legs, there's table B, and this is marked A and B. By doing that in advance, it makes it a lot easier to make sure that everything fits together. There's A and A. Very nice. If these didn't fit together as well, they fit together a little bit nicer now, even though these branches had dried out for years before I cut into them. They still ended up shrinking just a little bit. I cut the tendons about four weeks ago, and now it's a little bit loose. But once it gets glued up, it'll be fine. Again, Tinker Toy-ish. C and D. Happen to know the orientation I want. Let's see. I've got some sheet labels of where the legs are going to go on this, and I've already checked it out. So here's what I'm going to tell you and why I'm kind of finessing and playing with this. Before you end up drilling all the holes, you're going to take a look and see what looks the best based on curvature. For this, I'd rather have the legs curve out a little bit than curve in because there is a curve to it. They're not perfectly straight. So I tried to design it so these legs, when they're put in, will have a slight outward curve. That looks aesthetically better to me than a slight inward curve. I try to line it up so that way this stretcher would end up being more oblong high versus wide because it's an oblong oval cross section to it. And just figured it all out. So not a bad looking set of logs here. And all I would typically do is line it up, grab a pencil, finesse this around, do a little rotating and twisting, figure out where I want everything to go. I already put one hole in here as a center point for me to look at, but I would figure it all out and then mark around all of these. And I would, after marking them, I would mark them the A, B, C, and D, which is what these legs are, so I don't lose track of it. And I would drill my holes. I'd leave it loose. Right now, because these are a little loose, I actually did bring a strap clamp as an example. I may try to strap clamp it if it's a little too wobbly, but right now it's not too wobbly. Typically, I try to line up the tenon cutter so that when I test fit it, it's a little tight. And these were when I originally cut them, so I don't have to. In fact, sometimes it takes sometimes the hammer is used to take things apart rather than put it together. It gets really tight. But notice I haven't used any glue yet. I'm not going to glue it tonight because I don't want to have a half glued, an undried glue thing going home with me tonight. But I would test fit everything and drill all the holes first, and then I would start the gluing. And I would glue up in sections, put it all together, get it in, and I try to get everything glued at once instead of doing it one step at a time. I have found that with this, because things rotate and twist and nothing's at 90 degrees, that if you try gluing up the sections and let it dry, you may be off by a quarter of an inch or even an eighth of an inch, and things won't fit together as clean as you like to. It looks a little bit warped. But I don't think I need a demo for you what it would take just to drill a few more holes and tap it together, but you get the idea what this table is going to look like. Now, the other reason you don't necessarily glue it all first is that after you drill all the holes, here's a trick that Grady taught me. He gets the credit. Very complicated device here. The pencil on a stand. I actually cut this one with multiple holes, and they're all marked as far as height goes. If I want this at 18 inches, you go around and you mark all the legs as far around as you can. You can get almost all the way around every leg and mark it. I'm not marking it now because I don't want the marks on this particular one, and it's not all fit together. But you mark every one. You may have legs that flare out. The one that I put down earlier is a good example where the legs flared out. Once you mark it all around with the pencil where everything is, then you take it off and you cut the legs along those lines. You get the angles exactly where you need them, the heights exactly where you want them, cut them, then get the glue on there, put it all together. And it's still going to wobble, but not as much. And that's where on the bottoms, I'll hold this heavy thing up. That's where I just go and I take my sander again and I'll round out the edges. Usually one little tip might be sticking down a little more than another. I'll round that off, smooth it off. And that's all I need to do a final leveling in order to make sure that's all done. I do that after the glue is dry.
What's saw?
If you have a chop saw and you can line it up, that's great. Typically it's hard. I would just use this. This thing works really well. If you get something clamped down tight in a good vise, this thing will go through that and it allows you to easily follow that line without making a mistake. Yes.
Is there a methodology you use to measure that intermediate brace so it's the right length?
I just realized I wasn't repeating questions for those on Zoom, and I apologize for those online. The question was, is there something I do to check? Was it to check this height? Oh, yeah. So I checked all that ahead of time. So what I did was, for the spreader, let's say this one that's going across the entire width, I took into account that I was going to be cutting about a 3/4 inch tenon. So I knew approximately where the legs were going to go. I first fit together the legs and the substretchers. I forgot what the name is of the ones that go across this way, but I fit those first, measured the distance between them, added the 3/4 inch on each side, and then I knew how long to cut the spreader before I cut the tenons. And I got the length, and hopefully that wasn't too complicated, what I just said. I said it kind of fast. But basically, I tested everything in advance and checked the lengths before I cut the tenons. Now, here's the good news. If I'm off by an inch, so what? I mean, the whole thing, if it's too short, well, the leg just go in a 1/2 inch on each side. It's a friggin' rustic table. Who cares? If I cut it too long, just slice off an inch and recut the tenon. So one of the things I like about this work when I'm up at the cabin is I rarely use a ruler. To be honest, I just told you the length thing I do, but actually I think I do this. I just held it up and I used a pencil mark to mark it. Didn't even bother using a ruler. So not using a ruler is very freeing in certain woodwork. And often not using a ruler actually can give you more accurate results depending on what you're making. I try to avoid it whenever possible. Mark instead of measure. Put that in the t-shirt, sir. All right, I'm looking at the time. So I'm going to briefly go through an entirely different table design. I know I won't have time to show you all of it, but I'm going to get started so you get a feel for it. And while I'm disassembling getting the next table set up, are there any more questions about log tables I could share with anyone? Yes. I don't. The question was, do I use a moisture meter? And the answer is I don't, because I'm not that precise and I don't tend to make bigger furniture. I just know that I over dry everything by leaving it in my basement all at the same time for years at a time. And I don't tend to make furniture and such where I'm doing it and I have to wait and get something ready to go at a certain time period. I just know how long things are around, and typically it's about, what they'd say the rule of thumb is it's 1 inch a year per inch for drying things out. So something like this, I'll let it sit around for 2.5, 3 years before I'll do anything with it. So my answer is I don't, but I probably should. Yes.
Anticipating moisture change therefore size. Experiment with having your table surface moistened for the week prior to that, so hands shrink down on it.
So the question is, have I considered, I'm going to paraphrase back, hopefully I get it right, that do I consider moistening the wood in advance? The answer is no, because if I do that, then for the log pieces, it's going to be swelled up too much. It's going to shrink too much after it fits. In order to get it to fit, it has to be dry to start with.
Only the top.
Oh, in other words, just the mortises, not the tenons. Yeah, the holes. I have not done that, but if the tabletops were wetter, then yes, they would shrink a bit. You run a risk, though, of the top cracking if you do that. So I would rather over glue. All right, so let me tell you this. How do I fix it if it's too loose? If it's loose, I can pull it apart. I refill the joints with epoxy. Epoxy fills gaps. It works great. But another thing you can do is that if you don't care about the look, is you can run a screw in from the opposite side. So not sort of the tabletop, but on the legs that I showed you. On the bottom, the structure, I could run screws in from the sides and pull the structure together. I could do that and put plugs in to make it look better, or just leave the screws exposed, depending on what I'm making. If it's loose, I don't want to pull it apart. I will use screws and try to cover them up with plugs, depending on what I'm making.
Using dried shavings and increase the size of the tenon.
Another question is using dry shavings to increase the size of the tenon. The example I'm using is if I've already completed making the piece and I've already glued it together, I don't want to pull it apart. If I do want to pull it apart, the dry shavings work well. But I wanted to quickly mention is that when I drill holes in the back, I drill them oblong and rough, and I fill them with darker wood to look like a knot hole. So that way it doesn't look like a plug, like a circular plug. I did that on the first chair I made, and you would not know that they were repairs that were done on it. All right. Yes.
Ever used dowels instead of screws?
I have not, but the question is, do I use dowels instead of screws? And the answer is no, and the reason being is I'm trying to pull everything together tight. And for me, if I put a dowel in there, it goes in, but I still have the side-to-side wobble. If I'm trying to pull everything in closer, screws like clamp it together. A dowel will just make sure it doesn't fall out. But for me, a dowel doesn't necessarily eliminate the wobble. That's why. All right, I'm going to move forward. We're done with log tables. This is what I call a stick table. Do I have it up there? Let's see if we can get stick tables up there. You're already done with the 5 easy steps. 6 table. Totally different animal here. This is much more complicated, but a lot more fun, I think. I found all of these branches in the woods. They all came down. To answer your question earlier about whether I would ever use wood from the forest, yes. In this example, all of these are dried crappy logs and twigs and sticks from the forest. Most of them are really too brittle. However, when you put them all together in a matrix like this, it's strong. I mean, really, it is. I know this has a little bit of wobble to it, but it's if you put it together right, it can be strong. It's unique. I've made 3 or 4 tables like this so far. And in this example, all of these were pieces of pine that had galls on it. Every single stick had a gall or a burl, a pine burl. And that's what these big blobs are on here. And just made for a really unique table. If you look at it closely, there's nothing special that I did on this, no hidden joinery. There are exposed screws everywhere. I don't care for the kind of thing I'm doing. However, if I were to be placing this, something like this in a finer environment, then it would take me 2 to 3 times longer to make, but it would be worth it to use larger sticks, drill in countersinks, and plug every hole where a screw is going. So it is an option. But I'm going to show you how to make one without bothering doing that extra step. The first one I made was a mess, trying to figure out how I balance everything. And then after that, I figured out the trick. And it's this guy right here, the saddle. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to make something similar to this. Again, anything can be a tabletop. In this case, I had this nice slab of walnut that's been sitting in my shop for a long time. It's a beautiful might as well mention, everyone always asks about finishing eventually. I had the opportunity to test a few things out, and I've been happy with them. So I was sent samples of a few of these things. I got this last year. It's called Wood Honey Total Boat. It's food safe. You can use it for cutting boards and everything else. This top was 1 coat of wood honey. I just did it quickly for this session. You wipe it on, let it sit, rub it off, and you're done. So it's great for cutting boards. You should use more than 1 coating, I believe, but I just got that knocked out. Things like that, that chair and this table, I used, this one I used Gleam Another Total Boat product, it's a marine varnish. It cures very fast, and if you prefer water-based, Halcyon by Total Boat is also water-based. I'm told it's sold here. Milton told me. The chair is 3 coats. I find anything that's outdoors, and this is an outdoor table, if it's not exposed to direct sunlight, these things work great. If it is, someone can tell me otherwise. I want to know if anyone used a film finish that you can leave exposed for a long time in direct sunlight that won't eventually crack. I've yet to find one myself. But if it's not exposed, I'm really happy with those products. All right. This is fairly simple. So let's see what I got up here that I mentioned. Yeah, I said lightweight top, a lot easier to work with. If you have a really heavy top like that log table I had, I wouldn't recommend it when you're just using sticks to hold it all together. It's a little more complicated to make. A flat bottom top also makes it a lot easier because you can use this saddle. And if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, there you go, that's good. Not so simple steps. Remember before I said 5 simple steps? These are not as simple steps, but they're not too complicated either. What I would, let's see, where are we? 7, slide 8. Oh, it's nice when your printouts don't turn out right. All right, so I'll just go ahead and talk to what's up on the board. I have to turn around. By using the saddle, which is this case, the saddle is about 17 inches off the ground, and I want an 18-inch tabletop, and this is about an inch. So this leaves me about an 18-inch height little table. All you need to do is get sticks, and what I like to do with my branches is pre-finish and sand them as much as I can before I start. These are the 4 legs. They actually have I sprayed onto them a flat matte clear finish just to kind of lock in the sticks. The reason I'm making it with these particular sticks, it came from a crepe myrtle that a couple of years ago was trimmed, and I had a bunch of these around, and I was given a demo, so here I am. But anything you can find that's unique and fun is great to use. All I'm going to do is screw everything together. These are drywall screws, which I spray painted brown to make it look a little bit better. For those who haven't done this before, styrofoam is your friend. I just stuck all of these into the styrofoam and spray painted them from here. Now they're ready for me to go. If you've ever had to spray small parts, get yourself a block of styrofoam. That's the other tip of the day that'll change your life if you've never done it before and need to do it. I have a drill bit around here somewhere, which hopefully I didn't lose just now. Hopefully it didn't fall down. If it did, I'll find it later and I'll just talk through it. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna need to find that later. It's something that's made by Montana Tools, but other people make it as well. It is a drill bit on one side and a screw on the other. Okay. I'll move forward and try to find it so I'm not wasting your time while I look for it. It does mean that I won't be probably drilling out any more holes for you now, but I don't need to for this quick demo. Fortunately, I pre-drilled. So I'll just take the screws, put them in, hold this where I want it. Looks like it's gonna be a little bit crooked and I don't care. I'm gonna have these legs flare out a little bit. And I'm just gonna screw it in somewhere. And I've never done this at a live demo, so we all get to see how I do. Again, I wish I had that drill bit. There we go. Okay, there's one leg. Just kind of bend it down a little bit so it's flush with the ground. I'll get another, using somewhat longer screws for the top here. You guys are getting the idea already, I think, in that all I'm doing, there we go, you guys can see it. By having this saddle on top, I'm able to start screwing together all of these pieces and have the top exactly where I'm going to want it to be when I'm done making the piece. And just like the other tables I made, if it's a little bit crooked, when I'm all done, doesn't really matter because I'm able to do a little bit of fine tuning on the legs when I'm all done. Hmm?
If you had the drill bit.
Oh, that other bit is nice. You actually stick it in here and it's a quick turnaround. It has a drill bit on one side and it cuts the hole and a countersink in one fell swoop. Well, I've seen that, but it just flips around and it has the right size drill bit on the other side. The right size Phillips head on the other side. Yeah, it's really nice to have. So yeah, a bunch of companies do. The one I got came from Minnesota Tools. I know Josh got one. They were Montana Tools. That's it, Montana Tools. We both got them at a conference that we had gone to. And the reason it's a little tricky for me now is because I did not drill. I drilled out. I pre-drilled one side, but not the other on these. So I'm not going to be able to demo exactly what I would do completely. But the goal is to find out places where these will all fit and try to get them to connect potentially 3 places each for all of these. So if I were to try, I'll do a cross section here using a small. Hmm?
You're gonna keep it from racking.
I'm going to keep it from racking now. So for now, I'm just going to stick one down here, find a place to screw it. Without drilling the, try again without pre-drilling, unfortunately. Bring this up and I'll see if I can go through here without pre-drilling this, without splitting the twig. Really recommend pre-drilling and see how lucky I get. Yeah, I can hear it splitting. So I'm not going to keep going on that. What I'm going to do then, since I have lost my tool, is just kind of give you an idea, and that's going to finish up soon anyway. All of these pieces now are connected at 2 points. Everyone has 2 points connected to it. I would then, for example, take a piece like this, run it across to the other side. If I were to screw one here and one to this leg, I now have, this is now connected at 3 points. Having it connected at 3 points gives it incredible stability, and it's now connected here. So I would just keep crisscrossing pieces across down here. For me, the whole idea of this is to make a random look. So I may put one here to here. Once I do, then this leg will be connected at 3 points again. And I would just keep on going. Then I would maybe connect one from here to here. And I keep going. Now, when I'm all done, everything is gonna be nice and stable. Also, the saddle is now stuck. I can't get it out. That's why the saddle is screwed together and not glued. I'll be able to just take the screws out of the front and slide it out. So I learned a while ago, make a easy to remove saddle and you're all set. Now I know we've got to be out of here by 9 and I want to be done by 9:15. So it's just as well that I lost my screwdriver. I mean, my drill bit, but I'm going to leave this open for any last 1 or 2 questions, and then we'll close out the meeting and get all the chairs put away. What questions all of you guys have? All right. Oh, yes.
So on your pinning cutter, could you take cut a dowel, put it inside of it so it could hold your depth? Have you ever tried that?
I've not, but that would work. So to repeat, the question is, could I put a basic depth stop inside of this? And the answer is yes, I could. By cutting a dowel, sliding it in, that's actually a very good idea. I might try that in the future. Thanks for thinking of it. Oh, there you go. It was also recommended making a magnetic dowel, put a magnet on there so that it locks into place. All right. I want to thank everyone for your time. If you haven't picked up the discount,